The story begins with the Crown Prince Eckhart standing at the center of the gilded ballroom, his arm outstretched and his finger pointed accusingly toward the woman standing before him. His face is contorted with a mixture of righteous fury and calculated malice as he publicly declares the annulment of their engagement in front of the gathered assembly of distinguished guests. The hall, adorned with massive crystal chandeliers and intricate wall moldings, falls into a stunned silence while the prince bellows his accusations, claiming that Elfriede Zwanziger has committed the unpardonable sin of disgracing the saintess and attempting to take her life. Behind the prince, the saintess Lisa stands with a humble, almost demure expression, her dark hair contrasting with the bright light of the ballroom as she watches the scene unfold with an unreadable gaze. The prince's voice echoes through the high-arched room, demanding that Elfriede pay for her supposed sins while the crowd of noble onlookers remains frozen in shock. Elfriede stands perfectly still, her posture regal and her expression unbothered by the venomous words being hurled at her. She wears a layered gown with a ruffled bodice and dark corset, her long hair cascading down her shoulders in soft waves. Rather than recoiling in shame or weeping at the loss of her status, she simply closes her eyes for a brief moment before meeting the prince's gaze with absolute composure. She tells him to cease his nonsensical and false accusations, her voice remaining steady and calm despite the gravity of the situation. She then shifts her focus, glancing toward the side as she begins to dismantle the prince's narrative with surgical precision. She suggests that perhaps this entire spectacle is not about justice at all, but rather a convenient excuse for the prince to clear the path for a new engagement with Saintess Lisa, with whom he has clearly shared a very close relationship. The ballroom air grows heavy as Elfriede continues her verbal counteroffensive, her tone shifting to one of mild amusement as she looks directly at the stunned prince. She informs the room that had the prince simply consulted her beforehand about his desires, she would have gladly yielded him to the saintess without the need for such a theatrical display. A sharp gasp ripples through the crowd as she delivers the final blow to the prince's ego, asking him with a mocking tilt of her head if he actually believed that she ever loved him. The prince's face pales, his jaw dropping in a mixture of disbelief and wounded pride as the woman he expected to grovel for mercy instead treats him like a minor inconvenience. Infuriated by her lack of submission, the prince loses the last vestiges of his composure and screams for her banishment. He throws his arms wide, his face flushed with rage as he labels her a wretch and commands her to leave the country immediately. The decree of banishment, usually a death sentence for a noblewoman's social standing, is met with a soft, knowing smile from Elfriede. She turns her back on the prince, her cloak swirling around her as she walks away with the grace of a woman who has already won. She murmurs to herself that the moment has finally arrived, describing the banishment as a dreadful thing even as her eyes gleam with a hidden purpose. Suddenly, a new presence commands the attention of the entire room as Crown Princess Rosenmuller of Strunz steps forward. With a majestic sweep of her arm and a confident smile, the silver-haired princess declares that her empire will be the one to take Elfriede in. The atmosphere of the ballroom shifts from one of condemnation to one of high-stakes diplomacy as the princess of a powerful foreign empire publicly offers sanctuary to the banished woman. Elfriede stops and bows deeply toward Princess Rosenmuller, her movements fluid and respectful as she expresses her deepest gratitude for the timely intervention. She humbly asks for the princess's favor and guidance, signaling a new alliance that far outweighs the lost engagement with the prince. Princess Rosenmuller looks down at Elfriede with a warm, satisfied expression, stating that she merely did what was necessary for herself and tells Elfriede to think nothing of it. The scene ends with a close-up of Princess Rosenmuller's eye, reflecting a sharp, calculating intelligence that belies her earlier warmth. In her mind, she notes that one of her primary targets has been successfully secured. She views Elfriede not as a victim, but as a highly capable villainess with immense leadership, martial prowess, and political skill, a perfect idol and ally. Utilizing knowledge from her previous lives, the princess had anticipated this banishment and moved precisely to intercept Elfriede. Her goal is not simple charity, but the recruitment of powerful allies to live a life surrounded by her favorite characters. As she watches Elfriede, she sets her sights on a much grander ambition: world domination. The confined, rhythmic intimacy of a moving carriage, the wooden wheels clattering against the cobblestones with a steady, hypnotic beat. Two figures sit opposite one another, the tension in the cabin thick enough to choke the air. On the left sits Elfriede, her posture rigid, her expression a mask of guarded wariness. Opposite her sits Crown Princess Rosenmuller of Strunz, a figure of immaculate grace who hides her lower face behind a spread fan. The princess's eyes, visible above the rim of the fan, narrow with a predatory focus, analyzing the woman before her not as a person, but as a prize to be won. The internal monologue of the princess permeates the scene, revealing the cold calculation beneath the elegant exterior. She declares to herself that the real game begins now. To secure Elfriede as a true ally, Rosenmuller determines that she must first win her over completely, treating human loyalty as a mechanic to be mastered. Rosenmuller lowers her fan slightly, breaking the silence with a voice that dances between mockery and genuine inquiry. She muses aloud, wondering if she should offer condolences for the events that just transpired, or if a welcome greeting would be more appropriate for the situation. The narrative lens shifts to recap the immediate past. Elfriede, though spared the finality of execution, has been stripped of her titles and exiled from the royal family she once served. A scouting offer from a neighboring country, Strunz, has intervened in her fall. The focus tightens on Elfriede, capturing the stoic tragedy of her position. She sits with her hands clutched in her lap, the visual embodiment of duty betrayed. She reflects on her life as the daughter of the ducal house of Alyssum, a lineage known as the Shield of the Kingdom. She had intended to carry out her duty with unwavering loyalty, accepting an engagement to the crown prince not for love, but for the sake of the nation and the sake of the people. She had swallowed her personal desires, telling herself it was for the good of the kingdom. However, the arrival of the Saintess shattered this delicate political ecosystem. The faction that revered the Saintess rose to dominance, and the king, swayed by this new power, shunned the Alyssum house, neglecting even the family that stood as the kingdom's primary line of defense at the borders. Elfriede acknowledges the terrifying reach of the Saintess's influence, noting it has spread this far. She bows her head in a gesture of sincere humility, thanking Rosenmuller for defending my honor earlier. The princess watches her, a sharp sound effect, key, indicating her intense scrutiny. Elfriede's demeanor shifts from gratitude to a cold resolve. She admits that, truthfully, she was already fed up. She declares she has no lingering attachment whatsoever to the Alyssum kingdom that tolerates the Saintess, nor to Crown Prince Eckhart. Rosenmuller seizes this moment of detachment. She reveals that she has already dispatched a fast courier to Elfriede's father, Duke Zwanziger. She instructs Elfriede not to rush to conclusions, informing her that their current destination is the princess's estate near the border, where Elfriede will reunite with your parents. The carriage rattles onward as Rosenmuller advises her to discuss things properly with your family first, framing the exile as a grave matter that requires familial counsel. Elfriede bows again, thanking the princess for her benevolence. It is here that Rosenmuller plays her hand. She states calmly, "I'd like to appoint you as one of my close aides." Elfriede looks up, startled, but Rosenmuller waves off the shock, telling her to think nothing of it. The princess then leans forward, her expression darkening as she outlines the geopolitical reality of their situation. She posits a hypothetical scenario. If the daughter of a former duke were to become an aide to the crown princess of a neighboring country, the family left behind in Alyssum would be in grave danger. They could very well be taken hostage by the hostile faction. Rosenmuller presses the emotional wound, asking if Elfriede would worry about the family she left behind. Elfriede's eyes widen as the implication lands. Rosenmuller delivers the solution with a casual brutality. They should simply defect along with their entire territory. The proposal is radical, stealing not just a person, but a strategic buffer zone of the kingdom. Elfriede gasps, stunned by the audacity of the plan. Internally, Rosenmuller is ecstatic. She observes Elfriede's reaction, noting her unwavering composure when the banishment was declared and her perceptiveness in grasping the situation. The princess's inner thoughts reveal a desperate, fangirl desire. I absolutely want her as one of my close aides. The narrative then dives into Rosenmuller's hidden knowledge. As a reincarnated individual, she knows the true fate that was written for Elfriede. In the original story told from the Saintess's perspective, Elfriede was exiled and subsequently attacked by bandits and killed during transport. Rosenmuller knows this was not bad luck. Elfriede is too capable to be defeated by mere bandits. It was undeniably a silencing, an assassination ordered to remove a loose end. The princess's face contorts with a feral grin as she decides to rewrite the script. If the world doesn't need Elfriede, then I'll make use of her myself. Suddenly, the carriage lurches violently. A thunderous impact shakes the frame. Rosenmuller realizes immediately that her interference has caused the bandits, the assassins, to attack earlier than in the original timeline. Elfriede looks around in alarm, but Rosenmuller remains calm. She states that she has stationed soldiers at the estate and that they will be fine as long as they reach it. Elfriede, demonstrating her martial spirit, stands up and prepares to exit the moving carriage. She declares, "Your Highness, I'll be borrowing your carriage," intending to fight on the roof or draw the attackers away. Rosenmuller stops her with a sharp command, "That won't be necessary." The carriage door flies open, and Rosenmuller steps into the fray. The air outside is thick with danger, bandits flanking the vehicle on horseback. Rosenmuller extends a hand, her eyes glowing with magical power. She invokes a single word, "Spirits." A vortex of ice and snow erupts from her palm, swirling around the carriage with the force of a hurricane. The magic is precise and devastating. The bandits are engulfed in a flash freeze, their movements arrested by the sudden drop in temperature and the physical force of the spell. Elfriede watches in stunned silence, her pupils dilating. She knew the princess was a knight who could use magic, but the scale of this power, not to this degree, shatters her understanding of her savior. The carriage thunders on, breaking through the frozen line of attackers. Moments later, the sound of hoofbeats approaches from the front. "There they are," a voice cries out. Elfriede spots the banner approaching. It is the Zwanziger crest. These are not enemies, they are reinforcements. The carriage comes to a halt, and the door opens. A distinguished older man with slicked back hair and a military uniform steps forward. It is Duke Zwanziger. He calls out to his daughter, asking if they are unharmed. He explains that he rushed there the moment he heard what happened, anticipating that the Saintis faction would resort to force. Elfriede thanks him for saving them, though the true salvation came from the princess inside. The Duke invites them to rest at his estate, which looms on a hill in the background, a large manor surrounded by trees. He acknowledges there is much for us to discuss. The scene transitions to the interior of the estate, where Rosenmuller's retinue of heavily armored knights stands guard, their presence a silent warning to any pursuers. Inside a solar, Rosenmuller stands with Elfriede and her parents. She declares that everything is prepared, and that bringing the family in was a success. All that's left is to eliminate any obstacles. She outlines her plan for legitimacy. She intends to bring the Duke's family officially under the wing of the Struntz kingdom. She turns to the Duke, her demeanor regal and imposing. "Duke Zwanziger, we have prepared the rank of Marquis of our country for you. Will you accept it?" The Duke does not hesitate. He bows deeply, pledging his service to Crown Princess Rosenmuller. He declares he is prepared to go against my liege and the royal family, confirming Rosenmuller's assessment that he is not bewitched by the Saintis, like the King of Alyssum. Rosenmuller smiles, satisfied that things are proceeding as expected of Elfriede's father. Suddenly, a report comes in from the perimeter. The Alyssum Kingdom's army is attempting to force their way in. They care nothing for diplomacy or the consequences of invading a foreign noble's estate. The report states that the enemy claims to have the Saintis on our side, which they believe gives them more than enough justification to violate the border. Rosenmuller listens to the report with a look of disdain. "Pathetic," she scoffs. She acknowledges that the Saintis charm must be overwhelmingly strong to drive an army to commit an act that would normally destroy a nation through diplomatic fallout. Outside, the Alyssum knights charge the gate, shouting, "Charge!" and demanding the traitor be handed over. Rosenmuller, observing from within or perhaps projecting her intent outward, delivers a verdict: "You dared to draw your blade at me. Whatever the reason, you will receive a punishment befitting that crime." Back in the safety of the room, Rosenmuller turns to Elfriede. She frames the upcoming conflict not as a defense, but as an opportunity to establish a new achievement. She reassures Elfriede that there is no damage to her honor, but asks if she can ask a favor of her. Elfriede, understanding the request immediately, bows with a fierce determination. "Please grant me a chance to restore my honor," she requests. Rosenmuller grants it, "Certainly." The narrative perspective fractures for a moment, revealing the internal reality of Princess Rosenmuller once again. As Elfriede prepares to go out and face the army, presumably to display her martial prowess, Rosenmuller's composure cracks internally. A mental image shows the princess waving glow sticks, her face flushed with the excitement of a superfan. She screams internally, "My Ashi is so cool, and, yeah, the best." She categorizes Elfriede as a graceful and noble villainess, and nearly swoons. Outwardly, Rosenmuller catches herself. She coughs, correcting her posture. Oops. No, calm down, thinks. She composes her face back into a mask of royal indifference. She turns to Elfriede and says, "It's an honor to accompany you." "Well then, Marquise Zwanziger, let us go watch the show." The chapter concludes with the two women walking toward the balcony or exit. Rosenmuller's internal monologue betrays her one last time as she struggles to maintain her facade. She thinks, "I have to watch this up close. My Ashi's big moment." The act ends with the anticipation of violence, framed through the eyes of a scheming mastermind who is also the world's biggest fangirl of the woman she just saved. The corridors of power, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of impending conflict and the weight of history being rewritten. Brunhild, observing from a vantage point that separates royalty from the common fray, fixes her gaze upon a figure who commands the space below. This figure is Elfriede, a woman whose capability and work ethic are already known quantities to Brunhild, yet seeing her in the flesh evokes a reaction that transcends mere political calculation. In Brunhild's mind, the stage is set not just for a skirmish, but for a theatrical display of worthiness. She watches with the intensity of a critic and the fervor of an admirer, mentally projecting an image of herself waving glowing fan batons in support, her internal spirit cheering for the woman she idolizes, even as her physical form remains poised and regal. Below, the atmosphere shatters as Duke Zwanziger, a man of imposing stature and hardening resolve, makes his stand. The tension that had been coiling tight snaps as he confronts the royal faction. He is accused of betrayal, a charge that rings out across the courtyard, but the Duke does not flinch. Instead, he casts the accusation back with the force of a gauntlet striking the ground, declaring that the betrayal began not with him, but with the monarch who sought to tarnish his daughter's honor. His loyalty, once given freely to the crown, has curdled into defiance in the face of malice. Beside him stands his wife, a woman of equal elegance and steel, who affirms her husband's stance with a quiet but unbreakable resolve, viewing his defiance not as treason, but as the act of a lovely and protective husband. The line is drawn in the dust. The Zwanziger family has declared the royal authority an enemy to be destroyed. The confrontation escalates instantly from words to violence. Soldiers, armored and nameless in their uniformity, surge forward under orders to capture the rebellious nobles. They move as a tide of steel, intent on overwhelming the three figures who stand against them. However, they have severely underestimated the caliber of their targets. Elfriede steps forward, her silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the chaos. In the timeline Brunhild recalls from the original story, the royal family was supposed to have stripped the Zwanziger house of their power, including the legendary spirit sword. Yet, reality diverges from memory in a blinding flash of azure light. Elfriede draws a weapon that hums with ancient power, the air around her dropping in temperature until moisture crystallizes into suspended diamonds. With a motion that blurs the line between a dance and an execution, Elfriede unleashes the power of the spirits. Ice erupts from the ground, jagged spears of frozen water jutting upward to intercept the charging soldiers. The sheer force of the magical discharge sends shockwaves through the courtyard, knocking armored men off their feet and shattering their formations. It is a display of martial and magical supremacy that leaves Brunhild, watching from her safe distance, breathless with admiration. She mentally swoons, her internal monologue filled with the incoherent joy of a superfan witnessing their idol perform a masterpiece, even as her face maintains the cool mask of a princess. The soldiers, realizing that a single opponent is decimating their ranks, attempt to rally. Commands bark out to overwhelm her with numbers, to use the weight of their formation to crush the lone swordswoman. But the Zwanziger family does not fight alone. The Duke and his wife join the fray, their movements synchronized by years of partnership. The Duke's blade flashes with the precision of a veteran commander, while Elfriede continues her barrage of ice and steel. The three of them move as a singular unit of destruction, turning the courtyard into a kill zone where the royal soldiers find no purchase. The valor of the Zwanziger family, questioned by the crown, answers with a deafening roar of competence. Brunhild analyzes the scene with a tactical eye that wars with her fangirl heart. She notes the presence of the spirit sword in Elfriede's hand, a deviation from the canon that signals a fundamental shift in the world's narrative architecture. In the original plot, the weapon was a trophy for the royals. Here, it remains in the hands of its rightful heir, making her a force of nature. The battle concludes rapidly, the soldiers retreating or incapacitated, leaving the Zwanzigers standing amidst the glittering remnants of Elfriede's magic. The victory is absolute, a decided match that leaves no room for interpretation. The narrative shifts from the chaotic expanse of the courtyard to the hushed, oppressive opulence of a private drawing room. Sunlight streams through tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air, a stark contrast to the violence just witnessed. The heavy wooden doors creak open, admitted by a butler who announces the arrival of the guest. Elfriede enters, her posture rigid, her expression a mask of wary politeness. She wears a dress that speaks of high nobility, yet her eyes carry the lingering sharpness of the warrior who just dismantled a platoon of guards. She stands before Brunhild, the crown princess, uncertain of her fate but unbroken in her spirit. Brunhild wastes no time on empty pleasantries. She dismisses the formalities that usually clog aristocratic discourse, her gaze locking onto Elfriede with an intensity that makes the other woman flinch slightly. She compliments the fight, acknowledging the incredible skill displayed, but her true purpose cuts deeper than military appraisal. Brunhild leans forward, the sunlight catching the silver of her hair, and drops a verbal bomb that shatters the context of their meeting. She introduces herself not by her royal title, but by a name from a world long left behind, Aerie. The effect on Elfriede is immediate and visceral. The composure she held onto through battle and betrayal cracks. Her eyes widen, the pupils contracting in shock as the syllables of a Japanese name echo in this fantasy setting. She stares at the princess, her mind racing to process the impossibility of the statement. Brunhild presses the advantage, demanding the name from Elfriede's past life. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating, as Elfriede struggles to align her reality. Finally, she exhales, the tension leaving her shoulders as she whispers the truth, Uina. The revelation acts as a key, unlocking a shared understanding that transcends rank or birth. They are both reincarnators, souls drifting from a modern world into this tapestry of magic and intrigue. The realization washes over Elfriede, explaining the anomalies she had sensed, why the Saintess's bewitchment magic, a staple of the original game's plot, failed to take hold of the prince. It was because the players on the board had changed. Brunhild confirms this, admitting she too is a reincarnated soul, bound by the memories of a previous existence. The dynamic in the room shifts from interrogation to conspiracy. Brunhild invites Elfriede to drop the rigid honorifics, granting her permission to use her personal name, Brunhild, a privilege usually reserved for the closest of kin. The butler, standing silently in the periphery, notes the implication. It is a gesture of immense trust, signaling that Elfriede is no longer just a subject, but a confidant. Brunhild justifies this breach of protocol by designating Elfriede as a candidate for her personal aid, a position that requires absolute candor. As the conversation flows, Brunhild begins to unveil the architecture of her ambition. She speaks of the world they now inhabit, a place where status is often inherited by blood regardless of competence. For her, however, the path to the throne is paved with different stones. She values trust and credibility over lineage and titles. She explains that in this volatile world, where troubles brew on every horizon, she needs subordinates whose loyalty is born of shared vision, not just feudal obligation. Brunhild stands, moving towards the window where the map of the continent hangs, a sprawling depiction of fractured lands and competing powers. She traces the lines of the kingdoms with her gaze, her voice taking on a resonance of genuine conviction. Her goal is not merely to rule, but to unify. She seeks to bring the entire continent under a single banner, not for the sake of tyranny, but to secure happiness for herself and those she holds dear. It is a selfish altruism, a desire to create a safe haven large enough to encompass the world. She turns back to Elfriede, extending an invitation that is also a command. She requires assistance to realize this monumental ambition. Elfriede listens, absorbing the scale of the vision. The wariness that marked her entry has evaporated, replaced by a newfound respect and a sense of purpose. She sees in Brunhild not just a royal figurehead, but a leader who operates on a logic she understands, the logic of their shared origin, coupled with the drive to reshape their current reality. Elfriede makes her decision. She places a hand over her heart, bowing deeply in a gesture of profound submission and alignment. She recites her full title, Elfriede, daughter of Marquis Wanziger of the Strunz Kingdom, and formally dedicates her life and honor to Her Majesty, Crown Princess Rosenmuller. The pact is sealed, the atmosphere in the room lightening instantly as the heavy cloak of diplomacy is discarded. Brunhild, satisfied with the acquisition of her most capable asset and secret idol, claps her hands together, signaling the end of the formal proceedings. She suggests a drink to celebrate, a shift in tone that catches Elfriede off guard. The princess moves to a side table, lifting a decanter of amber liquid, the sunlight refracting through the crystal. She asks if Elfriede drinks, her demeanor shifting from monarch to casual friend. Elfriede, still adjusting to the whiplash speed of these developments, stammers a polite agreement, noting that a drink sounds nice. Brunhild pours the liquid into 2 glasses, the sound of the pour filling the sudden quiet. She lifts her glass, searching for a toast that befits 2 souls stranded in a strange land. She smiles, a genuine, conspiratorial grin, and proposes a toast to their hometown, a nod to the Japan they both left behind. However, as the glass is thrust towards her, Elfriede's expression shifts from relief to a comical dread. The situation, a high-ranking superior forcing a subordinate to drink alcohol in a semi-private setting, triggers a flash of corporate trauma from her past life. She recoils internally, the image of a pushy boss surfacing in her mind, turning the moment of bonding into a sudden panicked realization of workplace dynamics. Brunhild, oblivious to the specific trauma she has inadvertently triggered, revels in her victory. She has secured the loyalty of the character she admires most, taking the first definitive step toward her continental unification. The chapter closes on this note of triumphant manipulation and awkward bonding, the spirit sword wielder now firmly in the grasp of the villainous turned queen. A horse-drawn carriage navigating the imperfect infrastructure of a fantasy world. Brunhild, the crown princess, sits within the cabin, her body jostling with every impact of the wheels against the uneven road. She reflects on the stark dissonance between her romanticized memories and the physical reality she now endures. In her past life, the concept of a horse-drawn carriage summoned images of fairy tale elegance, perhaps akin to the polished, smooth rides found in the amusement parks of her former world, specifically the one in Chiba known for its magical kingdom. However, the current experience ruthlessly dismantles those delusions. The carriage shudders and vibrates with a bone-rattling intensity that pulverizes any dreamlike fantasies she might have harbored about aristocratic travel. The vehicle jolts significantly as it encounters a particularly rough patch, the sound of the wheels grinding against stone filling the small space. Brunhild, maintaining her composure despite the turbulence, notes their arrival with a sense of resigned pragmatism. She mentally compares the rough terrain to the notorious reputation of Chiba's access roads from her previous life, a private joke that bridges the gap between her 2 existences. Opposite her, Elfriede, the newly recruited aide and former rebel, observes the princess. She offers a polite comment on the fatigue that must accompany such a long, arduous journey, acknowledging the physical toll of the transit. The carriage clatters to a halt, signaling their arrival at the epicenter of political power. They have reached the royal capital of the Strunz kingdom. As the scene shifts from the transit to the strategic planning room, the narrative focus tightens on the geopolitical map spread out before them. Brunhild stands before the cartography, her finger tracing the borders of the lands that surround them. She directs Elfriede's attention to the neighboring nation, identifying it not merely as a political entity, but as the primary setting for the Otome game that dictates the logic of this world, titled, The Saintess of the Spirit Sword. Brunhild explains the metaphysical threat looming over the continent. Just as scripted in the original game's narrative, Saintess has appeared in that neighboring country, wielding a terrifying power to charm and enthrall everyone she encounters. Brunhild posits a theory that connects their experiences. This Saintess, the protagonist of the original story, is likely a transmigrator just like them, a soul from another world inserted into this reality with knowledge of the plot. If the Saintess were merely living out a new life, Brunhild suggests she would have no cause to interfere. However, the stakes are exponentially higher due to the mechanics of the game's multiple endings. Brunhild outlines the catastrophic potential of the reverse harem ending. In this scenario, the Saintess's influence creates a power vacuum and destabilizes the region to such a degree that the neighboring country suffers a total invasion. Brunhild declares her absolute resolve to prevent this timeline from crystallizing into reality. She snaps her fan shut with a decisive crack, signaling the shift from observation to active intervention. The princess details her containment strategy with cold, mathematical precision. Having confirmed that the Saintess possesses the capacity to magically charm the populace of her own kingdom, Brunhild decided that the only way to mitigate the damage is to physically reduce the number of people exposed to that power. Her solution is radical. She intends to aggressively shave off pieces of the Saintess's kingdom, annexing territory to remove it from the sphere of the Saintess's influence. This annexation acts as a quarantine measure, a preventative strike to contain the magical contagion. This context reframes the recent conflict with the Zwanziger family. Brunhild reveals that the acquisition of the Zwanziger fiefdom was merely the first tactical step in this grander strategy of containment. The fact that the Zwanziger territory remained uncharmed and rebellious against the Saintess's narrative pole supports Brunhild's theory. She speculates that Elfriede's status as a fellow reincarnator provided a natural immunity, shielding her people from the bewitchment that plagues the rest of the region. Brunhild continues her analysis, noting the political fallout in the neighboring realm. The recent incidents and territorial losses have likely eroded the authority of the Alyssum royal family, the rulers of the Saintess's nation. She creates a logical distinction. If the Saintess is a human from another world, then the territory she occupies does not inherently belong to the kingdom's domain, creating a loophole for annexation. Brunhild vows to continue this process, whittling down the neighboring kingdom's power and landmass through internal turmoil and demands for reparations. Her ultimate goal is to isolate the Saintess completely, stripping away her support network until she is nothing more than a useless little girl, with no political leverage or skills, left alone in a kingdom that has evaporated around her. Despite the ruthlessness of the plan, Brunhild offers a moment of vulnerability. She confesses to Elfriede that she possesses no cheat ability, no overwhelming magical gift or divine blessing common to Isekai protagonists. Her success in the recent conflict was not born of raw power, but of careful manipulation using the knowledge she retained from playing the game in her previous life. She turns to Elfriede, asking if this revelation, that her new liege is merely a strategist and not a demigod, causes disappointment. Elfriede's reaction is immediate and genuine. Her face softens into a smile of relief rather than disillusionment. She explains that this revelation actually comforts her. It confirms that the preservation of life during the recent battle, the decision to end the conflict before the Zwanziger soldiers were slaughtered, was not a calculated maneuver of a god, but the willful choice of a human being. Elfriede asserts that Brunhild is truly kind, recognizing that the princess's ambition is tempered by a desire to protect the lives of her future subjects. Brunhild, slightly embarrassed by the praise, turns away, attempting to frame her compassion as mere pragmatism. She argues that allowing her future subjects to die would simply weaken the national power she intends to wield, dismissing her own mercy as an act of selfishness. She quickly pivots the conversation back to the logistical nightmare of the post-war cleanup. While the physical battle has concluded, the administrative war has just begun. There are prisoners of war to process, borders to redraft, and treaties to renegotiate. Brunhild notes that handling this aftermath is often more grueling than the combat itself. However, the dynamic has changed. Brunhild now has Elfriede by her side as a capable aide. She outlines the political settlement for the Zwanziger family. Elfriede's parents will retain governance over their fiefdom, ensuring stability in the newly annexed region. Furthermore, upon the official conferral of Marquis status, the family's honor will be fully restored. The scene shifts to a balcony overlooking the capital, the sky clearing above them. Brunhild and Elfriede stand together, the former enemies now aligned in purpose. Brunhild warns her new aide that she intends to put her to work immediately. Elfriede accepts the challenge with a confident smile, telling the princess to bring it on. Brunhild amplifies the warning, promising to work Elfriede to the bone. This phrasing triggers a flash of recognition in Elfriede, who asks which black company, a Japanese term for exploitative corporations, Brunhild worked for in her past life, recognizing the specific vernacular of a corporate slave. Brunhild, caught in the slip of the tongue, tries to pivot, assuring Elfriede that unlike her previous life, there will be no unpaid overtime and that leave requests will be properly honored. The narrative transitions to the interior of the palace, where the reality of Brunhild's schedule begins to press down. A butler attends to her, outlining a grueling itinerary. She has a morning appointment with His Highness the Prince, followed immediately by an afternoon meeting with Her Highness the Queen. Brunhild, perhaps hoping for a reprieve, asks for the plan, only to be hit with this doubleheader of royal obligations. She reacts with a stunned, the weight of her duties crashing down. She questions the necessity of the meetings. While reporting to the Queen makes sense given the political shifts, she is baffled by the requirement to see Oni-sama, her older brother. The butler clarifies the prince's intent. He has requested a sparring match with Elfriede. This creates a moment of confusion for both women. The scene cuts to the training grounds, where Prince Karl-Heinz Rosenberger stands clad in training armor, radiating the energy of a man who solves problems with physical exertion. He declares loudly that he must test Elfriede to determine if she is truly fit to serve as his younger sister's aide. He acknowledges the Zwanziger reputation for combat prowess but insists on verifying it personally through a match. Brunhild is visibly exasperated by this development. She chides her brother, calling him a fool for not consulting her first. She asserts her autonomy, stating that Elfriede is the knight she chose, implying that her judgment should be sufficient. She argues that if he had concerns, he should have brought them to her verbally rather than staging a duel. Karlheinz defends himself with the logic of a protective older sibling and a knight. He claims his worry for his sister is natural and that his duty compels him to vet her guardians. However, Elfriede interjects, cutting through the sibling squabble. She states calmly that she does not mind the challenge. Despite Karlheinz's awkward attempt to backpedal or soften the mood, Elfriede accepts the premise of the duel with professional detachment. She views it through the lens of her knightly duties. If her strength is in question, the most efficient rebuttal is to demonstrate it. Brunhild sighs deeply, her internal monologue lamenting her distaste for jock types, who communicate primarily through violence. Beside her, Karlheinz beams, taking Elfriede's acceptance as the expected response of a warrior. He is eager, while Brunhild is resigned to the spectacle. The duel commences in the stone arena. Brunhild, accepting that she cannot stop this, orders Elfriede to go and defeat him. Elfriede notes the subversion of the trope. Typically, a sister would cheer for her brother, but Brunhild is explicitly ordering his defeat. The match is called to start. Karlheinz introduces himself formally as Karlheinz Rosenberger, requesting a fair duel. Elfriede responds with equal formality, stating her full name and accepting the engagement. The visual narrative explodes into motion as the two combatants clash. Karlheinz swings a heavy practice sword with formidable strength, the impact generating wind pressure visible in the arena. He fights with the aggression of a storm, his strikes heavy and fast. However, Elfriede is a combatant of a different tier. She parries and dodges with fluid grace, her movements economical and precise. She meets his brute force with technical superiority, her sword blurring as she deflects his attacks. In a decisive exchange, she slips past his guard. The scene captures the moment of impact. Kinetic lines emphasize the speed of her counterattack as she brings her blade to a halt just inches from his defenses, or perhaps strikes a non-lethal blow that disarms or incapacitates him. Karlheinz grunts in exertion and defeat. The match is called to a halt immediately. Elfriede stands poised and unruffled, while the prince acknowledges the skill he has just witnessed with a single word: splendid. The aftermath of the duel takes place on the sidelines. Karlheinz, sweating and humbled but in high spirits, formally entrusts his sister to Elfriede. He apologizes for any earlier rudeness, his doubts completely erased by the physical evidence of her competence. He asks Elfriede to leave Brunhild's safety in her capable hands. Brunhild, however, is less forgiving of the process. She stands with her arms crossed, scolding her brother for his methods. While she acknowledges that the outcome, an agreement and mutual respect, is positive, she criticizes him for not going about it the right way. She admonishes him to reflect on his impulsive behavior. Then, Brunhild delivers the true punishment. She gestures to a table set for tea, a luxury she had likely been looking forward to. She declares that because of this unnecessary interruption and the time wasted, the family tea party is cancelled. It will have to wait until next time. Karlheinz, realizing he has deprived his sister of her sweets, looks visibly crushed, sweating nervously under her glare. He accepts the punishment with a dejected, "Fine, I will." In a final gesture of inclusivity, Karlheinz requests that Elfriede be invited to the next tea party, cementing her place not just as a guard, but as a part of their inner circle. As they leave the arena, Elfriede comments to Brunhild that her brother is actually just a softe, recognizing the protective affection beneath the muscle-brained exterior. Brunhild observes that Elfriede and Karlheinz seem to get along quite well, a fact that seems to mildly amuse her. The butler interrupts again, reminding Brunhild that the schedule waits for no one. It is time for the meeting with Her Highness the Queen. Brunhild accepts the reality of her workload, signaling for them to proceed. As they walk through the grand, arched corridors of the palace towards the light of the next engagement, Brunhild's internal thoughts turn toward her mother. She wonders how the queen viewed the recent plan and its execution. The act concludes with Brunhild stepping forward into the next political challenge, ready to face the matriarch of the kingdom. The hushed, cavernous antechamber of the royal palace, where the air grows heavy with the scent of authority and old stone. Brunhild enters, the heavy doors sealing behind her with a finality that separates the chaotic world outside from the sanctum of the monarchy. She finds herself in the presence of the queen, a woman who mirrors Brunhild's own silver-haired elegance but wears it with the relaxed, terrifying lethargy of a predator who has nothing left to prove. The queen sits upon a velvet chaise, her posture casual yet commanding, a single hand propping up her chin as she observes her daughter's arrival. Brunhild apologizes for the delay, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room, but the queen dismisses the formality with a wave of her hand. She commands Brunhild to drop the titles and call her mother, noting with a wry observation that they are the only two souls in this breathing space. The conversation immediately pivots to the chessboard of continental politics. The queen, whose eyes sharpen with a gleam of calculated intelligence, remarks on the velocity of Brunhild's recent maneuvers. She dissects the timeline of events, the conferment of decorations, the swift support extended to the Zwanziger family, and the aggressive acquisition of their loyalty. She notes that usually, securing such a high-value asset, a candidate for a close aide who also possesses the military might of a border duchy, would be a labor of months, perhaps years. Yet Brunhild accomplished it in the blink of an eye. The queen's tone hovers between maternal pride and a strategist's critique, acknowledging that had she herself undertaken this task, she would have moved with far more caution, likely losing the initiative. Brunhild stands firm under this scrutiny, seeking confirmation. She asks if her proposal has met with approval. The queen affirms it, admitting her initial surprise at the unorthodox method of recruiting aides from what was effectively rebellious territory. However, she concedes that she trusts Brunhild's information network and, more importantly, her discerning eye for human capital. This admission acts as a bridge, shifting their dialogue from a performance review to a war council. They turn their collective gaze toward the neighboring kingdom of Alyssum. The queen recounts the catastrophic collapse of their neighbor's leadership. The report is grim. The king and crown prince of Alyssum committed errors so grave that the kingdom's structure fractured under the weight of their incompetence. The king was executed to take responsibility for the diplomatic and military failures, while the crown prince met an ignoble end, dying while attempting to flee the consequences of his actions. The city now writhes in chaos, law and order dissolving as power disputes erupt over the saintus. The queen reflects on this saintus with a mixture of horror and fascination. She describes the entity not as a woman, but as a frightening existence capable of bending reality. The power to make royalty, men bred from birth to uphold the sanctity of their lineage, forget their pride is a weapon beyond conventional logic. She muses that such power possesses an allure that transcends reason, reducing a monarch to nothing more than a paper tiger, a hollow shell stripped of dignity. Brunhild listens, her expression hardening. The conversation shifts to the reparations. The formal cession of the Zwanziger territory to the Strunz kingdom is presented not merely as a land grab, but as compensation for the aggression Alyssum's incompetence spilled over the border. Combined with a temporary suspension of trade, this move is designed to strangle the neighboring economy. The queen questions whether Alyssum will comply obediently with these harsh terms. Brunhild's response is cold and absolute. She asserts that their compliance is irrelevant, she is moving specifically to force this outcome. If they refuse, the border will simply cease to exist, erased by the advancing tread of Strunz's military and political influence. Brunhild elucidates her grand strategy. She intends to make an example of Alyssum, displaying to the other nations of the continent the terrifying cost of laying a hand on Strunz. This incident is not an end in itself, but a stepping stone, a foundational block in her ambition to unify the entire continent. The queen absorbs this, her eyes widening slightly at the scale of her daughter's vision. Brunhild continues, explaining that her upcoming foreign tour is a thin veil for a headhunting expedition, a search for more capable aides to bolster her administration. The official appointment of Elfriede as her knight commander is the first victory in this campaign. The queen, seeing the fire in her daughter's eyes, grants her blessing. She tells Brunhild to do as she likes, praying for her success. However, as Brunhild turns to leave, preparing for her next journey, the queen offers a final piece of maternal and regal advice. She warns Brunhild against the peril of tunnel vision. She cautions her not to focus so intensely on a single objective that she forgets to look at the world around her, specifically the people who stand beside her. She instructs Brunhild to keep the northern countries in check but reserves her most poignant directive for last. Take good care of your friend, Lady Elfriede. This specific phrasing stops Brunhild in her tracks. She realizes instantly that her mother has seen through the layers of formal hierarchy. The queen understands that Elfriede is not merely a subordinate or a treasure of the state, but a peer, a friend whose relationship with Brunhild transcends the rigid master-servant dynamic. The queen's insinuation is clear. No matter how close they become, they must never forget the distinct positions they occupy, yet they must cherish the bond that exists between the cracks of those titles. Brunhild exits the chamber, the weight of her mother's insight settling on her shoulders. She acknowledges that she received a passing mark, but the road ahead remains long and treacherous. The scene dissolves from the heavy atmosphere of the throne room to the intimate, refined quiet of a private drawing room. The scent of brewing aromatics fills the air, signaling a shift from politics to personal sanctuary. Brunhild sits, the tension of the previous meeting draining away as she comments on the pleasant fragrance. A voice, smooth and cultured, confirms her assessment. A butler stands ready, pouring tea with a precision that borders on art. He remarks that the timing is perfect. Brunhild praises him, noting that this level of service is exactly what she expects from her personal attendant. She observes him over the rim of her cup. He replies with a professional humility, stating that men who are too particular might be disliked, a playful jab at the exacting standards of the aristocracy. He reveals that he has served her for exactly 10 years and 38 days, a statistic he recites with the ease of someone who treasures every second. He claims to have a comprehensive grasp of her preferences, understanding that Her Highness requires information to be as detailed and specific as the tea he brews. Brunhild's internal monologue ignites with the fervor of a superfan. She gazes at the butler, Theodor Weierstraus, and sees not just a servant, but a masterpiece of character design. Her mind flashes back to the vanilla game from her previous life. Theodor was a conquerable character in a boy's love, BL, game, a genre twist that adds a layer of forbidden complexity to his existence. In the game's lore, he was a former assassin for the royal family, a man whose hands were stained with blood long before they ever donned white gloves. She scrutinizes his appearance, noting that he sticks out like a sore thumb in the best possible way. Blonde hair, blue eyes, features that scream main character, or at least critical plot device. She revels in the gap mo, the jarring but delightful contrast between his mild, subservient demeanor and the cold cruelty he hides beneath that facade. She recalls the game's visuals, the immaculate illustrations that depicted his duality, the captivating smile he offered the protagonist, and the darkness born of his assassin origins. She mentally confesses to buying boatloads of merchandise featuring him in her past life, remembering how his vulnerability, shown only to the main character, tugged violently at her maiden heartstrings. In this reality, however, he is her loyal butler. She took the initiative to obtain him early, knowing his potential from the game's script. She acknowledges his terrifying competence. He is skilled enough to balance the heavy duties of a personal butler while maintaining an extensive intelligence network. He is currently investigating the conformist faction within the Holy Kingdom of Astro-Maya. Brunhild shifts the conversation to business. She asks for news on the south. Theodor reports instantly, his demeanor shifting from domestic servant to spymaster. He informs her that the conformist faction has accelerated their timeline, making their move earlier than anticipated. He posits that without his intervention, Brunhild's plans would have faced significant delays. He explains that his intel network, a remnant of his espionage days, was crucial in detecting the shift. Brunhild issues her commands. She orders him to finish the preparations she requested and then regroup with her. She predicts that the enemy faction will attempt a stunt time to coincide with her upcoming visit to their nation. Theodor accepts the order with a bow, promising to hasten to her side the moment the arrangements are complete. He adds a layer of devotion to his response, stating that his sole duty is to serve by her side. Brunhild watches him, her internal thoughts fiercely possessive. She asserts that even if the original protagonist of the BL game were to appear now, she would tell them to take a hike. Theodor is already her important aide, a pillar of her ambition, and she has no intention of returning him to the narrative he was born from. He belongs to her administration now. The narrative concludes with Brunhild setting her sights on the horizon. The investigation into the Holy Kingdom is in motion, and the chessboard is set for the next phase of her journey. She declares their next destination, the Elven Nation. With a sense of anticipation that blurs the line between a conqueror and a fan on a pilgrimage, she prepares to meet her next Ashi, ready to bend the world to her will, one recruited character at a time. The claustrophobic confines of the royal carriage, where the romanticism of travel has long since been pulverized by the rhythmic, jarring violence of the road. Brunhild sits amidst the vibrations, her expression a testament to endurance fraying at the edges. The carriage, a vessel of luxury in theory, functions more like a torture device in practice, its wheels finding every imperfection in the earth. She calls for a ceasefire in this battle against gravity and motion sickness, signaling for a halt. The vehicle shudders to a stop, the sudden cessation of movement bringing a heavy, ringing silence to the cabin. Her query about fatigue is met with a polite but weary affirmation from her companion. The exhaustion is a shared burden, heavy and palpable. The scene transitions to the reprieve of a roadside break, the carriage standing idle like a beast of burden catching its breath. Brunhild and Elfriede sit at a folding table, the open air offering a stark, cleansing contrast to the stuffy cabin. Here, amidst the tranquility of nature, Brunhild pivots the conversation from travel woes to the architecture of their next conquest. She invokes the lore of a fantasy novel from her previous life, the tale of the Holy Grail. She tests Elfriede's knowledge, but the knight shakes her head. This specific tragedy is unknown to her. Brunhild begins the recitation, her voice weaving the tapestry of a doomed narrative. She describes a protagonist, a young high elf endowed with a future as bright as it was fragile. The story is set against the backdrop of a brutal racial war between humanity and demons, a conflict that tore the world asunder. In this chaos, the high elf forged a bond with a black-haired young man, a friendship that defied the segregating lines of the war. They were soulmates in a fractured world, their connection deepening until the cruel twist of destiny revealed the truth. The friend was the demon king, the architect of the very war consuming the land. The tragedy spirals downward with the inevitability of gravity. The high elf, torn between the patriotism owed to his kingdom and the love he held for his friend, made the fatal choice. He prioritized the personal over the political. He stole the Holy Grail, the metaphysical anchor of his nation's prosperity, and surrendered it to the demon king. The consequences were absolute and devastating. His people, stripped of their divine protection, banished him into the void of exile. He lost his home, his status, and his honor. And in the final, bitter stroke of the writer's pen, the demon king betrayed him. The friendship was a lie, a strategic manipulation to secure the Grail. The high elf died in despair, a tragic figure used and discarded by the narrative. Brunhild recounts this with a visceral intensity, her hands clenching as she relives the trauma of reading the bad end. She confesses her devastation, the memory of the story leaving a bitter taste that transcends lifetimes. Elfriede observes this emotional outpouring with a dry, teasing wit, noting that the princess's otaku obsession is leaking through her royal facade. Brunhild, momentarily flustered, defends her passion. To her, this is not just a story, it is a grave injustice committed against a character she adores. Then, the conversation shifts from literary critique to tactical briefing. Brunhild reveals the identity of the high elf in their current reality. He is not merely a character in a book, he is a living, breathing entity in the elven kingdom they are approaching. And despite his youthful appearance, a result of his species' longevity, he is over 300 years old, a legal Shota, in the vernacular of her past life. Elfriede comments on the breadth of the princess's strike zone, a remark that highlights the absurdity of applying modern dating preferences to ancient fantasy beings. Brunhild outlines the mission parameters. The bad end she despises is the default timeline of this world. The neighboring country that allied with the demons in the original story was none other than Strunz, their own nation. This realization aligns her personal fangirl desire with her political objectives. Intervening to save the high elf is not just an act of charity, it is a strategic necessity to prevent the collapse of the region and rewrite a history that ends in ruin. She declares her intent to smash the scripted tragedy and forge a new conclusion, one where her Ashi, idol, does not die in despair. Theodore, the butler whose loyalty borders on the supernatural, materializes from the periphery. He reports the completion of their preparations with the efficiency of a shadow. The timeline is set. The operation commences in 3 days. The trio stands united in the dappled sunlight, a conspiracy of three ready to derail destiny. The narrative jumps forward, the journey concluding at the gates of the elven nation. The architecture shifts from human stone to the organic, soaring elegance of elven design. They are welcomed with the reverence due to visiting royalty, but Brunhild's attention is laser-focused elsewhere. She spots him immediately, Lucien Maupassant. He stands in the distance, a figure of ethereal beauty and immense magical potential, unaware that he is the protagonist of a tragedy currently being rewritten by a foreign princess. Brunhild instructs Elfriede to keep a vigilant watch over him. He is the fulcrum upon which the next few days will turn. 3 days pass, the tension coiling tighter with each hour. The setting shifts to a ceremonial shrine, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. Columns rise like pale fingers towards the sky, framing the object of desire, the Holy Grail. It sits upon a pedestal, a chalice of immense power said to guarantee the fertility and prosperity of the land through spirit protection. To the nations of the continent, it is a strategic asset worth killing for. To Brunhild, it is also a piece of merch, a collectible item from her favorite story that she covets with the greed of a collector. She mentally tallies how many replicas she would have bought in her previous life, one for use, one for display, and one for the archives. Elfriede and Brunhild observe the Grail, but their focus snaps to its guardian. Lucian stands watch, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. But something is wrong. The air shimmers, a subtle distortion in the visual field that a layman might miss. Elfriede, however, possesses the eyes of a warrior. She detects the deception instantly. The figure standing guard is not Lucian. It is a construct, a diversion created by spirits to mask the absence of the real guardian. The illusion is perfect to the untrained eye, maintaining the facade of security while the reality has already shifted. Brunhild realizes the timeline has accelerated. The events of the tale of the Holy Grail are unfolding. Lucian has abandoned his post, likely heading to the fatal meeting with the Demon King. The heist, or rather, the interception, must happen now. The scene dissolves into the chaotic aftermath of the discovery. The illusion fades or is breached, revealing the theft of the Grail. Shouts erupt, the calm of the sanctuary shattered by the realization that their national treasure is gone. Guards scramble, panic spreading like a contagion. Amidst this turmoil, Brunhild executes her own diversion. She feigns a sudden illness, a swoon calculated to extricate her from the suffocating observation of the diplomats. She collapses gracefully, creating a localized crisis that draws attention away from the broader chaos. She turns to Theodore, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper masked as a plea for aid. She requests that he serve as her representative, a coded command that initiates the escape protocol. The butler accepts the role with a bow that hides his true purpose. The deception is seamless. The frail princess must be retired to her quarters, leaving her capable attendant to manage the fallout. The narrative accelerates into kinetic action. The pretense of the ballroom is abandoned for the rugged darkness of the exterior. Theodore, or perhaps a figure moving with his speed and guise, sweeps Brunhild up into his arms. They are no longer diplomats. They are operatives moving through the night. Brunhild checks the status of the second front. She remarks that Elfriede seems to have carried out her side of the mission perfectly. This confirms that the chaos back at the shrine, the theft of the Grail, or the distraction that allowed this escape, was Elfriede's handiwork. The knight is elsewhere, likely securing the objective or leading the pursuers on a wild chase. They race towards the forbidden forest, the ominous staging ground for the tragedy's climax. Brunhild, cradled in the arms of her butler, outlines the destination. This is where Lucian and the Demon King are scheduled to meet. It is the coordinates of the betrayal. She acknowledges the poor taste of crashing such a private, albeit doomed, meeting, but the stakes leave no room for etiquette. As they breach the tree line, the speed of their travel increases. The wind whips past them, the scenery blurring into streaks of shadow and moonlight. Brunhild, usually the composed strategist, is momentarily rattled by the sheer velocity and the informality of her transport. She stammers a protest, asking if they are really going to proceed, just like this, carried like a parcel through the woods. The butler offers no verbal retort, only speed. His legs churn the earth, propelling them forward with a singular, driving purpose. Brunhild's internal monologue overtakes the physical sensation of the run. She projects her mind forward to the scene she intends to disrupt. She visualizes the bad end she is racing to prevent, the betrayal, the defeat, the banishment. She sees the image of Lucian, broken and discarded, floating in the void of despair. Her resolve hardens into diamond. She refuses to let her Ashi fall into that darkness. She is the author of this new reality, and she has brought a red pen to edit the script. With a mental flourish, she declares the commencement of the rewrite. She will shatter the tragic trajectory of the tale of the Holy Grail and reconstruct it into a narrative that suits her convenience. The chapter closes with the image of them plunging deeper into the forest, a missile of determination aimed squarely at the heart of the plot, ready to rewrite destiny with force and fangirl fury. A young male elf named Lucian approaches a dark-haired woman in the moonlight, presenting her with a golden goblet. The woman accepts the artifact, claiming she will only borrow it to save children, while Lucian trusts her word. Suddenly, a commanding voice calls out from the darkness, ordering them to wait. A blonde noblewoman arrives on the scene, carried in the arms of a tall, composed man. The noblewoman demands to be put down immediately, but the man, Theodore, refuses with a polite smile. She stares intently, thinking that she must stop the demon lord right here and now. Theodore abruptly agrees to lower her, catching her off guard with his sudden compliance. The dark-haired woman holds the goblet, while Lucian looks towards the new arrivals with concern. The thief bids Lucian farewell, promising to return, and vanishes into the night with the artifact. The noblewoman reaches out in a futile attempt to stop the escape, letting out a startled gasp. She scolds Theodore for letting the thief escape, but he calmly replies that it went according to plan. Lucian turns to the strangers in confusion, asking why they have intervened. The noblewoman interrupts him, stating she has a question for him before anything else. She asks if he handed over the grail knowing the country would perish without it. Lucian insists he only lent it and that there is no problem if it is returned immediately. The noblewoman looks at him with pity, realizing he is completely unaware he has been betrayed. The two stand facing each other in the moonlit clearing as the wind blows past them. She asks if the demon Lord Yugu ever swore an oath to return the item to him. She explains that while demons lie, they are a race that strictly honors contracts and vows. Lucian protests desperately, claiming that Yugu is his friend and such a betrayal is impossible. She counters that believing in friends is a virtue, but blind faith is simply unacceptable. She points out that he must have already realized the Holy Grail will not be returning. A hand reaches out towards him, offering a chance for salvation. The noblewoman extends her hand, telling him to take it if he wishes to be saved. Lucian stares at her in silence, torn by indecision and the weight of his mistake. Suddenly, a shout rings out from the forest, announcing that he has been found. The noblewoman demands an immediate answer, stating his choice is simply yes or no. Lucian's eyes widen in fear as the reality of his situation closes in on him. He makes his decision and grasps her hand, seeking her protection. She silences him with a finger to her lips, promising to protect his life if he keeps quiet. She commands sternly that he is forbidden from objecting or talking back. An accusing voice roars from the trees, blaming Lucian for taking the Holy Grail. A group of elves emerges from the shadows, demanding Lucian answer for his crime. They shout that if the clan perishes, it will be entirely his fault. Lucian lowers his gaze in guilt, unable to respond to the angry mob. Another elf binds Lucian with magic, declaring him a criminal to be detained. An elder elf coldly suggests that sealing his powers and exiling him is the appropriate punishment. The noblewoman watches quietly, noting how Lucian endures the condemnation silently. She realizes the High Elves' demand for exile is a plot to purge Lucian from the clan. She deduces they want to remove the next representative candidate to seize power for themselves. She recalls the original story where the gentle Lucian accepts his guilt and wanders in exile. She refuses to accept such a tragic ending for her favorite character. She steps forward, interrupting the elves to say it is too early to reach a conclusion. She suggests returning to the altar, hinting there might have been an oversight. She whispers to Lucian to rest assured, as she came specifically to save him. To everyone's shock, the Holy Grail sits perfectly still upon its pedestal. Lucian stares in disbelief, knowing it wasn't there before and thinking this must be a lie. The noblewoman observes the scene with a knowing look. She announces that the Holy Grail has clearly not been stolen at all. She tells the elves to release the innocent man they have bound. The guard complies, unable to argue with the physical evidence before them. The magical bonds shatter, freeing Lucian's wrists. Lucian stands free, looking at his hands in amazement. The noblewoman comments softly on the turn of events. She notes that spirits, who hate lies, are gathering around him. She declares that this proves the accusation against him was a complete false charge. The conspiring elves flinch and sweat nervously, their plot exposed. She condemns their actions, saying such a conspiracy blasphemes the spirits. Her butler whispers that the country is dangerous and suggests they withdraw. She agrees with his assessment. She asks Lucian if he has nowhere to go if he were to be exiled. She extends an invitation for him to leave the country with her. Sunlight breaks through the clouds as the two stand amidst the pillars. The elder elf panics and tries to stop them, claiming there was a misunderstanding. He pleads for Lucien to return, warning that the outside world is dangerous for elves. Lucien smiles softly, having made his decision to leave. He takes the noblewoman's hand, accepting her offer. Lucien walks away with his savior, leaving the stunned elves behind. A carriage rattles through the forest, carrying the group away from the elven lands. Lucien thanks her for saving him, but she dismisses it as nothing of consequence. Lucien questions the purpose of the Holy Grail while Brunhild reveals she already knew he intended to hand it over to the Demon Lord. Brunhild explains that she swapped the real Holy Grail with a fake before the ritual to prevent the Demon Lord from obtaining its power. She details how she prepared a counterfeit vessel and exchanged it with the original to protect Lucien from being held responsible for the theft. Lucien is confused, recalling that the Grail he held back then possessed genuine spirit power which made him believe it was real. Brunhild clarifies that spirits have allies among humans too, hinting at the method she used to imbue the fake with power. She reveals with a smile that she used a spirit sword to lend authenticity to the counterfeit Grail. Brunhild describes the chaotic moment of the theft where she filled the fake Grail with spirits to deceive everyone involved. With a playful gesture, she confirms Lucien's suspicion that she manipulated the situation perfectly to fool the Demon Lord. She admits she foresaw his exile from his homeland as a logical consequence of these events. Brunhild confesses that she invited him to her country anticipating his banishment and is now expecting a favor in return. She smiles cunningly, acknowledging her intricate plan to secure his presence and power for her own kingdom. A sudden noise from outside the carriage interrupts their conversation, drawing Brunhild's attention to the window. The scene shifts to the Demon Lord, who furiously crushes the fake Grail upon discovering the humiliating deception. Brunhild notes that the Demon Lord won't remain silent after being handed a useless forgery and will likely seek answers. She explains that the Demon Kingdom's children are suffering from a mysterious illness that only spirit power can cure. Brunhild asserts that Lucien's spirit power can save the dying children, even without the actual Holy Grail. She challenges Lucien with a direct question about what course of action he chooses to take regarding the suffering children. Lucien falls silent, wrestling with the weight of the decision and the complex politics involving his past betrayal. He questions if Brunhild is asking him to save Yi, the very person who betrayed him and caused his exile. The scene ends with the title, Chapter 7, Stop Pitying Yourself, as the carriage arrives at the Demon Lord's estate. A simple divider page marks the transition in the narrative flow. The carriage arrives and Lucien and Brunhild sit before a grand audience, tension filling the room as they wait. A close-up emphasizes Brunhild's composed demeanor as she prepares to negotiate, her hand resting calmly on her lap. The heavy doors swing open, signaling the arrival of the formidable figure they have come to meet. Brunhild instructs Lucien to stay behind her and not step forward, to which he obediently agrees. A horned figure with long dark hair enters and introduces themselves as Yi, the king of Barbastel. Brunhild confronts Yi, stating that he intends to pretend the events in the forest never happened. She introduces herself formally as Brunhild Rosenmüller, the crown princess of the kingdom of Struns. Yi calmly asks for the reason behind their visit, maintaining a regal and guarded expression. Brunhild explains she brought doctors from Struns because she heard the children of the kingdom were suffering from a difficult disease. She offers her own medical knowledge, expressing a desire to be of some assistance to the afflicted children. YGG notices Lucien hiding behind Brunhild and questions if the elf is the doctor she mentioned. Brunhild denies Lucien is the doctor, keeping his true identity and purpose guarded for the moment. YGG accepts the offer of help and asks them to do their best for the sake of the kingdom. The page is blank, serving as a visual break or chapter transition within the volume. Another blank page indicates a pause in the visual storytelling. Two young children lie in beds, looking pale and sickly as they suffer from the mysterious illness. Brunhild and Lucien stand by the bedside while a doctor examines the young horned patients with concern. Lucien whispers his own name to himself, perhaps recalling a memory or stealing his resolve. Lucien asks Brunhild if he can really save them, and she confirms that spirit magic treatment is their only hope. Brunhild asks Lucien what he truly desires, pushing him to find his own internal reason for helping. She reminds him that hating the Demon Lord doesn't mean he should abandon the suffering children before his eyes. Lucien realizes that seeking retribution against YGG and saving innocent lives are two separate issues. He reflects that refusing to help would make him no better than the people who exiled him in the first place. With renewed determination, Lucien declares that he wants to save the children. Brunhild smiles, acknowledging his resolve and confirming that this is the right path. Lucian asks for permission to attempt the treatment using spirit magic, and Brunhild agrees to his request. Brunhild adds a condition, asking the demon lord to speak with Lucian once the treatment is concluded. YGG and Lucian stand facing each other, a heavy silence hanging between the former friends. YGG agrees to the condition, allowing the treatment to proceed under those terms. The doctor steps aside as Brunhild declares the start of the treatment for the two children. Lucian approaches the bed where the children lie, reaching out his hand to begin the magic. He activates his spirit magic, light beginning to gather and swirl around his outstretched hand. The light intensifies as Lucian focuses his power, channeling it directly into the suffering patients. The children wake up feeling no pain and thank their caretaker, showing immediate signs of recovery. Brunhild smiles at the success while Lucian looks relieved and slightly exhausted from the effort. The doctor reports that everything is ready for the next step, and Brunhild orders Theodore to prepare the magic circle. Lucian stands in the center of a glowing magic circle, casting a wide area spell to treat more patients at once. A close-up of Lucian's eyes shows his intense concentration as he maintains the complex spell. The magic spreads throughout the room, enveloping the area in a healing light that touches all the patients. The doctor assures them that fevers will drop soon and offers medicine for any future symptoms that might arise. The doctor humbly attributes all credit for the cure to the young lady Brunhild, while YGG expresses gratitude. YGG states that it is time to fulfill the promise and steps outside with Lucian and Brunhild. Brunhild thinks internally that a foothold for relations with the Demon Kingdom has been successfully established. The three walk outside, leaving the outcome of their impending conversation to the choices of the two former friends. The text notes that the future now depends entirely on the choices Lucian and YGG make. A close-up of Brunhild's face shows a serious, contemplative expression as she watches them depart. YGG and Lucian stop walking and face each other, the tension of their past betrayal resurfacing. Lucian prepares to ask the question that has been haunting him since his exile. The scene focuses on YG's back, emphasizing the distance and secrecy between them. Lucian states that there is only one thing he wants to ask his former friend. He demands to know if YGG approached him solely for the Holy Grail, planning to deceive him from the very beginning. YGG's expression tightens, revealing a mix of guilt and stoicism at the accusation. YGG reveals that after becoming friends with Lucian, the condition of the children worsened. Lucian is shocked as YGG explains that he doesn't have to believe it, but the desperate situation forced his hand. YGG reveals that the one who told him the Holy Grail would save the children was a high elf. Lucian reacts with shock, realizing the involvement of his own kind in the deception. The revelation sinks in that a high elf orchestrated the situation to pit them against each other. Brunhild puts the pieces together, realizing that a high elf opposing Lucian was the demon lord's mysterious informant. Lucian realizes the true depth of the betrayal came from within his own people, not just YGG. Trembling with emotion, Lucian asks what all of this means, his worldview shaken. He screams at YG, asking if their friendship was real. Why did he still choose to betray him despite it? The chapter ends with Lucian's anguished question hanging in the air, leaving the nature of their bond in question. Lucian weeps in despair, regretting how the situation has unfolded. Brunhild sternly commands Lucian to stop pitying himself and face reality. She reminds him that as a high elf, he possesses overwhelming power that sets him apart. Brunhild warns that those who possess such power are inevitably envied and dragged down by others. She urges him to become self-aware and learn to distinguish between his true enemies and allies. The Demon King watches silently as Lucian trembles in emotional turmoil. The Demon King asks if Lucian wanted to save the children, even if it meant being hated by his best friend. He notes that Lucian's wish was granted and asks if he has any further desires regarding him. The Demon King admits he must apologize to Lucian for the deception. Lucian reacts with shock and anger at the mere mention of an apology. Furious, Lucian demands to know what an apology resolves after he was deceived. He screams that apologizing is only to satisfy the Demon King's own guilty conscience. Brunhild closes her eyes, absorbing the intensity of Lucian's emotional outburst. Lucian trembles, overwhelmed by the raw betrayal he feels. Brunhild intervenes, telling the Demon King she will take custody of Lucian as continuing now benefits neither of them. She promises to contact him once Lucian settles down, marking this as a debt he owes her. The Demon King agrees to entrust his precious friend to her care, acknowledging the bond. Alone with Brunhild, Lucian calms down and begins to apologize for his outburst. Walking through the garden, he expresses regret for losing his composure. Brunhild reassures him that she would have lost her cool in his position as well. She asks if he will become her friend, though Lucian notes he thought they already were. Smiling, Brunhild thanks him and asks him to eventually forgive the Demon King too. Lucian reacts with a mix of reluctance and surprise at the request. He grumbles that he might consider it if the Demon King apologizes again in 100 years. Brunhild seizes the opportunity, asking him to stay with her for those 100 years. Lucian agrees to the century-long commitment on the condition that she doesn't betray him. He reaches out his hand, declaring he will trust her as a friend. Brunhild looks down at his offered hand, acknowledging the weight of his trust. She takes his hand with a bright smile, sealing their 100-year pact. Back at the castle, Brunhild sits exhausted as her attendants approach. The scene shifts to the imposing exterior of the royal castle. Brunhild admits she has been out too much lately and needs to address the concerns of her ministers. She accepts her duties with a resigned but knowing smile. Brunhild assures Lucian she has no plans to leave the castle for a while. An official enthusiastically presents a stack of documents for her approval, surprising her. Brunhild regrets causing worry to her grandfather amidst the flurry of paperwork. Later, she decides to host a tea party to introduce everyone properly. Lucian picks up a goblet and asks about the replica. Brunhild tells him to look closer at the object in his hand. Lucian realizes with shock that the spirits are reacting to what he thought was a fake. Brunhild confirms it is the real Grail, noting its presence in the Holy Kingdom was expected. She reveals that the spirit chose Lucian to be the true owner and friend of the Grail. Brunhild explains that without the Grail, the Holy Kingdom's divine protection will fade and the nation will decline. She notes that the abundant water and crops sustained by the spirits will diminish as the spirits leave. Lucian stares at the Grail, contemplating the weight of a nation's fate in his hands. Brunhild calmly states that the elves aren't perishing, but rather the era of divine protection is ending so they can walk on their own. When Lucian calls her harsh, she replies that the rise and fall of nations is a natural occurrence. Lucian holds the Grail up, acknowledging the truth in her pragmatic view. Brunhild teases that with the Grail, he could be sought after by any nation or even start his own. Lucian places the Grail down, rejecting the idea as too heavy a burden for him right now. He grins, reminding her that they have a promise to stick together for 100 years. Brunhild smiles softly, thanking him for his loyalty. Lucian asks if she intends to use the Grail herself since he is keeping it. Brunhild refuses, stating that as a ruler, she cannot rely on something that will eventually disappear and cause decline. They sit at the table, discussing the future of her country without reliance on the Grail. She expresses disdain for relying on others when they can achieve things with their own power. Brunhild playfully asks if he finds such self-reliance boring. Lucian laughs, agreeing with her sentiment completely. He decides to research crops that suit the local land, asking if that is acceptable. Winking, Lucian declares that plants are an elf's specialty and he will enrich the kingdom enough to surprise the spirits. He asks if he should change his tone as a subordinate, but Brunhild tells him to stay as he is, except before vassals. Brunhild welcomes him formally, expressing her pleasure at their partnership. She warns him that she believes in thoroughly using capable talent, and Lucian accepts the challenge. Lucian smirks, noting that the next 100 years certainly won't be boring. The scene pans out to the peaceful gazebo where they are having tea. A tea set is prepared, steam rising gently from the cups. Brunhild comments that it has been a long time since she had her father's tea. Her father, Elias, hopes the tea suits his cute angel's taste. He explains the different blends he prepared for himself, his father, and Amelie. Lucian wonders if this is a test, seeing the prince consort serving tea himself. Brunhild's grandfather laughs heartily nearby. Count Waldschmidt tells Lucian to relax as this is a private family gathering. The group sits together in the gazebo, enjoying the intimate atmosphere. Brunhild praises Lucian for his perfect etiquette, comparing him to Elfriede. Lucian compliments the tea, saying the herb scent is perfectly drawn out. He expresses gratitude to the princess for giving someone like him a place and a role. Suddenly, the mood shifts as the father asks if his name was Lucian, causing Brunhild to tremble with laughter. Elias warns Lucian that he won't give him his daughter, revealing his doting parent nature. The grandfather laughs, telling Elias to be at ease. With a dark smile, the grandfather threatens to dispose of Lucian if he ever speaks nonsense about taking her. Two guards tremble with sweat pouring down their faces, terrified by a gaze that holds no warmth despite the friendly facade. The blonde noblewoman sips her tea with a serene expression, internally delighted that her efforts to be valued are finally paying off. She flashes a confident wink, asserting her absolute necessity as the successor to the family line. A diverse group including an elf and a knight gather in a garden, the atmosphere light and friendly among the allies. The elf girl beams with joy, suggesting they invite her mother next time as the plan seems to have worked perfectly. A furious knight slams his hand down, demanding to know why Hilt was not invited to the gathering. Hilt sweats nervously while making excuses about his brother being too busy, though the blonde woman looks unimpressed by the oversight. He hastily promises to clean up and present himself properly after his training is finished. A messenger bursts in to apologize to Prince Rosenberger for an urgent interruption. The blonde noblewoman hides a knowing smirk behind her fan, seemingly amused by the sudden turn of events. A girl gushes with excitement over the brothers' potential romance, though another dismisses the idea of the muscle-brained man finding love. The prince and the blonde woman turn their attention to a messenger bringing a grave report. The messenger reveals that the prophecy maiden has appeared in the country of Mimosa. A heavy silence falls as the blonde woman processes this information with a sharp, serious gaze. She stands alone in the garden, troubled that the events are unfolding much earlier than she anticipated. Surrounded by floating books, she deduces that a reincarnator might be altering the timeline, posing a threat to her beloved favorite character. With decisive resolve, she orders her butler to immediately prepare for a formal courtesy visit. She snaps her fan shut and declares their next destination is Mimosa, the land ruled by beastmen. The prince, the elf, and the redhead pledge their support, ready to lend their strength to her cause once again. The blonde woman looks into the distance, admitting she still doesn't know the reason for her arrival in this world. Despite the uncertainty, she turns her back on the doubt, resolved to do whatever it takes to survive. Her eyes burn with determination as she vows never to let her favorite characters suffer misfortune. Deep in the woods, hooded figures plot an ambush, identifying the route the crown princess will take. A crescent moon hangs ominously in the sky, watching over the silent forest. The conspirators confirm everything is proceeding exactly according to their treacherous plan. The blonde woman, now identified as Brunhild, grimly predicts that Mimosa will be the place where the crown princess meets her end. A carriage rattles violently as it speeds through the forest, the journey fraught with unseen danger. Inside the carriage, Brunhild sits with her maid Elfriede, noting that their male companions will join them later. Brunhild casually asks Elfriede if she ever read isekai romance novels in her previous life. Elfriede smiles and admits she read a few, particularly favoring stories that featured fluffy animals. Brunhild excitedly identifies a specific title about enjoying fluffy creatures in another world. She explains the plot where a reincarnated heroine becomes the prophecy maiden and marries the wolf beastman prince. Elfriede recalls a setting where half-siblings of different races could marry, confirming Brunhild's memory of the lore. Brunhild claps her hands in delight, relieved that they share knowledge of this specific story. The two engage in a spirited otaku conversation, debating the merits of cat ears versus dog ears from their past lives. Brunhild passionately declares her push is the prince's sister, a rabbit princess with fluffy hair and a brother complex. Elfriede agrees, expressing her distaste for how the heroine steals the prince away from his fiancée's family. Brunhild rants furiously about the plot convenience of the prince discarding his duties for love at first sight. Elfriede clenches her fist, arguing that a protagonist must be sincere to be likable, validating Brunhild's anger. The two women clasp hands, their bond deepened by their shared status as reincarnated comrades. The carriage continues its journey through the peaceful-looking woods, unaware of the trap ahead. Boots hit the ground with a heavy thud as shadowy figures leap from the trees. Brunhild begins to mention their approach to Mimosa just as the atmosphere shifts. The carriage comes to a jarring halt, shocking the women inside as the door is flung open. Hooded assassins swarm the vehicle, blades drawn and ready to strike. Brunhild and Elfriede freeze in terror as an intruder breaches their sanctuary. Elfriede screams Brunhild's name and throws herself in front of the blade to shield her mistress. Blood sprays through the air as Elfriede takes a deep slash across her chest. Brunhild stares in wide-eyed horror, her mind refusing to accept the brutal reality before her. A scream of denial tears from her throat as she watches her friend fall. She catches Elfriede's collapsing body, shouting that she will not acknowledge this tragedy. The assassin clicks his tongue in annoyance as his partner scolds him for hurting the princess, by mistake. Brunhild sharply realizes from their bickering that the attackers do not know what the princess actually looks like. The bandits surround the women, ordering them to surrender and exit the carriage immediately. Brunhild glances at the emergency bell cord, calculating her next move amidst the chaos. She notes with relief that no one is dead yet, deducing that the enemy's goal is abduction rather than assassination. Whispering a command to the injured Elfriede, she tells her to leave the situation to her handling. Brunhild steps forward with imperious authority, acting as a subordinate outraged by the rudeness to the crown princess. The bandit leader concludes that the injured woman must be the princess, fearing punishment for damaging the target. Brunhild stares him down with a steely gaze, solidifying the deception to protect her friend. She calculates that if she makes them believe Elfriede is the crown princess, the bandits will be forced to treat her wounds. The bandits order all the women to be transferred to their own transport wagon. Brunhild helps the bleeding Elfriede into the bandits' wagon, huddling close to her. The wagon lurches forward, speeding away from the scene of the ambush. Elfriede leans against the wall, pale and sweating from the pain of her injury. Brunhild rips a strip of cloth from her own dress with a sharp tear. She expertly bandages Elfriede's arm and chest to staunch the bleeding. Tears well in Brunhild's eyes as she apologizes for her naivety in thinking they were safe within domestic borders. The bandit caravan travels deeper into the forest, escorted by riders on horseback. Brunhild reassures her friend, declaring that she already has a plan to turn the tables. Her hand touches a magical ornament in her hair, which begins to glow with faint light. She embraces Elfriede, promising that they will definitely return home safely together. The journey drags on, the tension inside the wagon mounting with every mile. The wagon rattles ominously as the bandits ride alongside, confident in their capture. Elfriede weakly begs Brunhild to use her as a decoy and escape while she can. Brunhild sternly shuts down the suggestion, refusing to even discuss abandoning her friend. She looks at Elfriede with intense focus and asks to borrow her spirit sword. Elfriede protests that the sword can only be wielded by chosen ones, but Brunhild insists she has a chance. Brunhild's hands tremble slightly as she reaches for the hilt of the sacred weapon. With a flash of determination, she draws the blade, ready to defy the laws of magic to save them. Eleanor grips her sword in silence, focusing her mind as she prepares to take full responsibility for the impending strike. The blade rings sharply as she declares she will bear the same pain as her comrades, accepting the burden of her failure. Lightning begins to crackle around her as she channels her spirit energy, her expression hardening with resolve. She commands her maids to get down immediately, signaling that she is about to unleash a devastating attack. Invoking her noble contract, she calls upon the spirits to gather and lend her their power for a single strike. With a roaring shout of "Fewer," she thrusts her sword forward, unleashing a torrent of magical fire. A massive beam of light blasts from the tip of her blade, engulfing the assassins in a blinding explosion of spirit energy. The assassins realize too late that she is a mage and try to rush her, willing to take damage just to silence her spell. Smoke rises from her scorched hands as she pants heavily, scanning the area to see if any enemies survived the blast. Her strength fails her and the sword clatters to the ground, her body trembling from the immense magical backlash. She stares at her hands, the skin burned and peeling, realizing the severe toll the forced spirit magic has taken on her. Despite the pain and the fact that she could only manage one strike, she smirks knowing the signal has surely reached her allies. A surviving assassin lunges out of the smoke, and her maids scream in terror as the blade comes down on the defenseless princess. Eleanor remains calm in the face of death, confident that Theodore would never fail to spot her signal. A flash of steel cuts through the air, intercepting the assassin's blade just inches from her face. The attacker is blown back by an invisible force as a new fighter descends onto the battlefield with overwhelming speed. Lucian glares at the enemies with terrifying intensity, declaring that he will not let anyone who harmed her escape alive. Hovering in the air, Lucian instructs Theodore to leave a few survivors for questioning before launching his counterattack. The assassins click their tongues in frustration, realizing the tide has turned and attempting to flee into the woods. Lucian drops from the sky to block their path, a confident smirk on his face as he cuts off their escape route. Eleanor calls out his name in relief, while Lucian casually asks the assassins what they think they are doing to his princess. Massive vines erupt from the earth at his command, crushing the assassins and dragging them into the darkness. The battle ends instantly, and the maids rush to Eleanor's side while she looks on with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She turns to her terrified attendants with a gentle smile, assuring them that everyone is safe now. Lucian casts a healing spell on her hands, the light repairing her skin so perfectly that not even a scar remains. Her friends weep with joy, hugging each other as they see the princess is unharmed thanks to the timely rescue. Lucian asks what happened to her hands, and the maids frantically beg him to treat her, unaware he has already finished. Eleanor explains she forced the spirit sword to act as a wand, causing the severe backlash on her physical body. Lucian presses a finger to her lips to silence her, warning her not to discuss the details of her spirit magic openly. In a hushed whisper, she admits she used the sword to fire a signal flare, pushing the spirits beyond their normal limits. Lucian scolds her grimly, telling her that if she had miscalculated even slightly, she would have blown her arms off. He sighs and scratches his head, muttering about how she always acts so recklessly without concern for herself. Switching to a formal tone for the audience, he apologizes for his lateness and asks for punishment, though his eyes tease her. Eleanor plays along, thanking Brunhild for the aid, though she knows exactly who is really responsible. She winks at him, declaring that she is the one who should be thanking him for saving her life once again. Straightening her posture, she states she won't let this attack intimidate her and will proceed to Mimosa as planned. Her expression darkens as she adds that the enemy made a grave mistake by hurting her favorite person. Clenching her healed fist, she vows that the price for this transgression will be excessively high. Voices shout from the distance as a fresh unit of guards finally arrives to secure the scene. A royal carriage rumbles into view, surrounded by heavily armored knights moving in formation. Lucian looks surprised as the carriage door opens, not expecting the person who steps out. Eleanor is confused and asks why her brother has come personally, questioning the need for such a high-profile guard. Her brother steps out with a bright grin, announcing that it is a special two-person protection detail. Eleanor looks exasperated, wondering why the VIP target himself would come to a dangerous extraction point. The prince argues that while Theodore is capable, the queen ordered him to ensure Eleanor's mission succeeds personally. Eleanor sighs in defeat, telling him to at least try not to worry their father with his reckless behavior. The scene shifts to the grand stone gates of the palace as the carriage arrives safely at its destination. Eleanor stands ready to welcome her guests, thanking them formally for traveling all this way. The announcer presents the arrivals, introducing the Prince of Rosenberg and the Crown Princess of Strunz. Eleanor curtsies elegantly, introducing herself as the first princess and welcoming the delegation. The group walks down the palace corridor, a strange girl with bunny ears skipping along beside the royals. The palace interior is revealed to be vast and ornate, with high arched ceilings and intricate decorations. The bunny-eared girl grins excitedly, in stark contrast to Eleanor's composed and stoic demeanor. Suddenly, the girl pulls out fans and starts cheering, revealing she is a massive fan of Eleanor and calling her Ashi. She tries to touch Eleanor's ears, barely containing her ulterior motives while muttering about how cute she is. Eleanor maintains her frozen smile, politely ignoring the harassment and inviting them to the garden for tea. The girl, Kyoko, beams with delight and eagerly accepts the invitation, completely oblivious to the mood. She happily agrees to follow, treating the royal meeting like a casual fan event. A maid pulls out a chair in the sunlit garden, where a table has been beautifully set for tea. Kyoko compliments the garden's atmosphere, and Eleanor thanks her with a practiced, diplomatic smile. Prince Gerald of Mimosa sips his tea with closed eyes, enjoying the peaceful ambience. The only sound is the clinking of his spoon against the cup as he stirs the tea in silence. Eleanor sips her own tea, her eyes guarded as she watches the prince and his eccentric companion. Lucian stands silently behind Eleanor, observing the visitors with a sharp, protective gaze. Kyoko introduces Prince Gerald, casually mentioning that Strunz seems like a dangerous country compared to theirs. She mocks the earlier attack, implying that Gerald's life in Mimosa is much more peaceful and secure. Kyoko laughs and points to herself, revealing that she acts as Gerald's poison taster to keep him safe. Eleanor observes them coldly, thinking that a prince who lets a prophecy maiden act this rudely lacks discipline. Kyoko complains that she wasn't invited to sit and asks to join the tea party despite being a servant. A maid tries to intervene, but Kyoko ignores her and pushes forward with zero hesitation. Eleanor realizes with annoyance that the prophecy maiden has arrived and is exactly as troublesome as expected. Kyoko stares at Eleanor intently, her expression shifting from playful to evaluating. She points a rude finger directly at Eleanor, asking bluntly who this person is supposed to be. Eleanor and the prince are both stunned by the sheer lack of manners and respect. Kyoko suddenly realizes her mistake and bows frantically, apologizing for her rudeness to the princess. A sharp slap echoes through the garden as Gerald strikes Kyoko across the face to discipline her. Kyoko tears up, apologizing and claiming she doesn't know the etiquette because she was just summoned from another world. She rubs her cheek, muttering that Eleanor doesn't seem that different from a normal person anyway. Gerald stands coldly with his hand raised, showing no remorse for striking his subordinate. He apologizes to Eleanor, asking her to overlook the incident for the sake of appearances. Eleanor realizes the prince has no real control over the girl and that the maiden is dangerously ignorant of her position. She agrees to let it pass, telling the prince she looks forward to seeing him at the evening ball instead. Eleanor walks away with her head high, passing the sobbing maiden without a backward glance. As she leaves, she smirks to herself, resolving that she will conquer both this country and the prophecy maiden. The chapter ends with Eleanor's determined expression, her plan for domination firmly in place. Amidst a storm of shattering crystals, the protagonist raises her hand to unleash a devastating magic spell. She boldly declares that the enemy is surrounded by far more than just two people, shattering their morale. As the knights groan in paralysis, she coldly assures them that the numbness will only last for a short while. An elf ally sits casually on a ledge, mocking the soldiers by stating that a double-digit force is insufficient to handle them. The trio of the protagonist, the elf, and her attendant stand united, exuding a power that is simply too overwhelming for the guards. With a piercing glare, the protagonist challenges the remaining enemies, asking if they really wish to continue this futile fight. The three powerful figures dominate the hall, their mere presence serving as a warning to any who would dare oppose them. The terrified rabbit-eared Miko screams at the king to stop, realizing they are hopelessly outmatched. Groaning in pain, the king refuses to yield, desperately clinging to the belief that the prophecy maiden's power will save them. The protagonist offers to teach him the harsh truth about the prophecy he relies on so blindly. She reveals the devastating reality that the so-called prophecy maiden possesses absolutely no power whatsoever. The king and the rabbit-eared Miko are struck dumb with shock, unable to process the total negation of their hope. Their expressions freeze in disbelief as the foundation of their rebellion crumbles before them. Paralyzed by the revelation, they can only mutter in denial, refusing to accept the protagonist's words. The protagonist mocks the Miko's frivolous desire to simply enjoy a fluffy life in another world. She sarcastically describes the heartwarming tale of a powerless maiden supporting a gentle prince for a lifetime. However, she darkly notes that in the original story, the villainous sister was destined to be assassinated or exiled. With absolute resolve, the protagonist declares her intention to forcibly change that tragic ending. A massive sound effect resonates as her magic exerts physical pressure on the room. The scene shifts momentarily to the quiet, moonlit window, contrasting with the tension inside. A sudden sound breaks the silence, startling the occupants of the room. The moon shines brightly through the large window panes, bearing witness to the confrontation. The Miko and the king recoil in fear, confused and terrified by the protagonist's overwhelming knowledge. Desperate and cornered, the king screams at the Miko to show him the power that is supposed to save the country. He yells frantically, demanding she manifest the miracle he believed in, but she remains helpless. The Miko bluntly admits she has no power, complaining that she received no cheat skills upon arriving in this world. She confesses she only knew future events, leaving the king devastated that his rebellion was based on empty knowledge. The protagonist confirms that the Miko's prophecy was merely knowledge of the original story's plot. She coldly dismisses the Miko as nothing more than a regular person who happened to come from another world. The king collapses in utter despair while the Miko trembles, their ambitions completely crushed. The protagonist asks if the Miko was prepared to die, noting that those who attempt to kill must be ready to be killed. The Miko screams in a panic, insisting that she is the protagonist and the heroine of this world. She throws a hysterical tantrum, demanding to know why things aren't going according to her desires. Unmoved by the outburst, the protagonist orders her attendant, Elfriede, to dispose of the nuisance. The Miko lets out a short squeal of terror as judgment befalls her. Her face contorts in pure horror as she realizes her plot armor does not exist in this reality. Magical equations and codes appear in the air as Elfriede initiates the punishment spell. Elfriede sentences her to a water coffin to atone for the sin of hurting her beloved idol. Magic swirls violently as Elfriede unleashes her fury against those who dare to harm Kyoko. The king is struck by the magical impact, groaning as he is forced to his knees. The protagonist commands the king to know his place if he truly considers himself royalty. Another heavy impact slams into the king, crushing his resistance completely. The protagonist declares that as the price for his foolishness, she will take both the Miko, Eleanor, and the kingdom of Mimosa. The king shouts that such a conquest is impossible, but the protagonist confidently replies that she can. She reveals the terrifying truth that the Strunz army is already on the move. A commander is shown ordering the entire army to advance at daybreak. A loud signal echoes as the military force prepares to strike. The king falls into despair, realizing Mimosa is finished as he learns the enemy army exceeds 10,000 soldiers. The protagonist and the defeated Miko stand in silence. The power dynamic completely shifted. The protagonist tells the Miko to stop trembling and orders her to be useful instead. Humbled and terrified, the Miko pledges that she will be of service to Crown Princess Rosenmuller. The protagonist warns that if she fails, her precious brother and country will vanish from the continent. The Miko formally surrenders, stating her soldiers will stop resisting and beg for Strunz's mercy. She declares this surrender in her full name as the first princess, Eleanor Langlois. She frames the conflict as a rampage of the Langlois family to spare the people of Mimosa from harm. The Miko bows her head, expressing gratitude for the protagonist's generous arrangement. She humbly asks for the protagonist's favor, and the protagonist accepts, promising to answer her resolve. A close-up shows their hands clasping, sealing the pact between the conqueror and the submissive. The protagonist reflects that until now, she has only taken things by force. She tells the Miko that the process of making her a true close aide begins from this moment. The scene transitions to a view of a bustling city street, marking the start of a new journey. The protagonist suggests they rest at a local inn for the day. She commands the Miko, now called Eleanor, to follow her, and the Miko obediently agrees. Eleanor asks the crown princess where they have arrived. The two princesses walk together through the city, observing the lively atmosphere. The protagonist identifies the location as Strunz's largest trading city. The streets are packed with diverse people, highlighting the city's economic prosperity. Merchants of various races interact freely in the marketplace, conducting business. Eleanor is surprised to see not just beastmen, but elves and demons mingling in the crowd. The protagonist explains they enacted laws to allow free trade for all races and penalize discrimination. Eleanor notes sadly that beastmen are inevitably targets of discrimination regardless of the law. The protagonist philosophizes that discrimination stems from anxiety, as people naturally fear what is different. She smiles, reiterating that feeling fear towards the unknown is a natural human reaction. However, she points out that merchants are resilient and will embrace other races if it means making a profit. She explains that this pragmatic approach is why the city flourishes as a trading hub. Eleanor realizes that while laws can't banish discrimination, mutual benefit can encourage acceptance. The protagonist agrees, adding that if Eleanor works as her side, discrimination will decrease even further. She winks, stating that discriminating against her aide would be equivalent to drawing a bow against the future queen. Eleanor looks at the protagonist with a mix of admiration and newfound understanding. The protagonist concludes that by the leader demonstrating this attitude, the people will eventually come to view it as normal. Two girls discuss the importance of becoming neighbors and truly knowing one another to bridge the gap between them. They realize that understanding is the first step to acceptance. Recognizing that these differences are simply unique individualities, they acknowledge that differing appearances, skills, and even races are merely parts of what makes them who they are. The blonde girl inwardly panics as she realizes she is just parroting a business book about management from her past life. The horned girl explains that the Langlois family has been crushed and Mimosa has become a vassal state, with a new clan taking the throne. The protagonist listens to the report with a stoic expression, simply acknowledging the harsh news. Mimosa reveals that her innocent younger brother was exiled to a faraway land after a petition from the vassals. A heavy silence falls as the reality of the political shift settles in. Tears stream down the horned girl's face as she thanks the protagonist for her mercy and assistance. She wipes away her tears, steeling herself for the future ahead. Pledging her loyalty, she vows to live as a faithful citizen of Strunz from this day forward. The protagonist accepts the vow, stating she has high expectations for her new ally. She announces that their next destination is the Lupinus Empire and demands immediate assistance. The horned girl smiles confidently and tells her master to leave it to her. The scene shifts to the grand throne room where the protagonist faces judgment. The towering castle of the capital stands imposing under the sky. Inside the ornate hall, the atmosphere is tense and filled with silent judgment. The protagonist stands before the throne, waiting for the empress to speak. The empress remarks that the protagonist was tripped up by her own carelessness and let her guard down. However, she admits that because the crisis was averted and results were delivered, she will overlook the mistake this time. The empress warns sternly that there will not be a second chance, and the protagonist bows in acceptance. With a sharp gesture, the empress signals that the formal audience is concluded. She declares that the stiff formalities are now over. Dropping her cold demeanor, the empress hugs the protagonist and expresses relief that she is safe. The protagonist apologizes softly for causing so much worry. Drinks are poured as the two settle into a private strategic discussion. The empress praises the move to make Mimosa a vassal state as a clever play. She notes that cultural integration takes time, so a gradual approach is wise. The protagonist explains her plan to use Eleanor as a model to assimilate talented personnel. The empress reveals that there was a specific mastermind behind the recent disturbances. The protagonist correctly guesses that the Lupinus Empire was pulling the strings. She deduces their plan was to incite anxiety within Mimosa and drive the people toward the prophecy maiden. This was timed to happen while Eleanor was kept away on diplomatic duties. They intended to invade during the ensuing chaos to expand their territory. It was a scheme to gain profit and land without directly dirtying their own hands. The empress swirls her wineglass and comments on how shrewd the enemy is. The protagonist agrees, noting that the wise emperor lives up to their reputation. The empress warns that dark shadows are now moving within their own country as well. Ever since the annexation of Mimosa, these forces have been active and noisy. Suspicious figures in turbans are seen whispering in the streets. The empress refers to them cryptically as the sheep of the desert. The protagonist pauses, confused by the unfamiliar term. The empress clarifies that they are a right-arm force. A shockwave goes through the protagonist as she realizes sheep butler refers to Theodore's connections. She sits in stunned silence as the implications of Theodore's involvement sink in. The moon shines over the city, highlighting the gravity of the secret history. The empress explains that the fallen kingdom of Winter, Theodore's homeland, was once a great harem kingdom. After the country fell, the royal family was scattered across the lands. The protagonist recalls a book she read in her previous life titled, May I Love You. She remembers the story beginning with a line about the youngest princess of Winter. The text described a neighboring country that boasted immense military power. It narrated how that country collapsed from within due to the influence of the surviving princess. She realizes with horror that if the princess is alive, she triggers the destruction route for the kingdom of Strunz. To ensure the peace and safety of Strunz, the threat must be disposed of immediately. She trembles, hesitating at the cruelty of the necessary action. The thought of ordering Theodore to eliminate his own family weighs heavily on her. She questions if such a heartless command is truly her only option. Steeling her resolve, she decides that as the crown princess, there is only one path to take. Gazing out the window, she prepares herself to make the impossible choice. To prevent the total collapse of Strunz, she must act preemptively. Even if it means purging Theodore's own family, she cannot waver. A report arrives stating that Winter operatives are maneuvering within the country. Theodore appears at that moment, asking if his mistress called for him. The protagonist reviews the report that the enemy's goal is inciting anxiety and selecting spies. Theodore calmly asks if she wishes for them to be eliminated. She states she let them swim when they were just spies, but she can no longer overlook their actions. Theodore is surprised when she tells him she is removing him from this specific mission. She declares firmly that she is taking him off this case immediately. She reveals the mastermind is the former 21st Princess of Winter and his own siblings. She claims she is removing him to show there is no room for personal feelings in this purge. She argues that handling the execution herself will better prove her loyalty to Strunz. Theodore interrupts her, asking her to wait. He declares that it does not matter if they are his former brothers and sisters. He asserts that she is his only master and he has no reason to spare anyone who tries to harm her. Accepting his resolve, the protagonist orders Theodore to judge the former Winter royalty himself. With eyes burning with determination, she commands him to hunt them all down. Theodore bows deeply and accepts the order with a chilling smile. He walks past the cloaked figures of his past, severing his ties without a glance. The night settles over the city as the decision is made, sealing the fate of the fallen royals. A loyal subordinate reflects on his master's overwhelming kindness as he rushes through the night. He realizes she took the blame for a command to spare him from carrying the guilt. Determined not to let her shoulder the entire burden alone, he identifies the one action he can take. He speeds through the darkness, resolved to support her. His mission is to proactively eliminate any future threats that could trouble his lady. The scene shifts to a report document detailing the cleanup operation. The report sits in a dimly lit room, signifying the end of a dark chapter. The operation successfully neutralized the 27th princess and the winter remnants, crushing any chance of national subversion. The crown princess stands by the window, declaring she has no regrets about her choice. Yet, she admits to herself that a better method might have existed. She clenches her fist, cursing her own lack of ability. Theodore enters and urges the lady to rest, but she insists she still has duties to finish. He pleads with her to stop, noting her complexion is poor from the mental strain. Theodore declares that the lady's peace and happiness are his own happiness. She smiles softly, acknowledging his care and admitting she made him worry. Taking his hand, she agrees to take the rest of the day off. Theodore jokingly asks if she needs someone to sleep beside her, to which she laughs and calls him a dummy. She snaps her fingers, shifting her demeanor instantly. She decides to direct her pent-up frustration toward the mastermind, Lupinus. She orders that Elfriede must recuperate for a while, even if magic has healed her wounds. The narrative shifts to a view of the city architecture under the daylight sky. The princess walks with her bunny-eared companion, noting that diplomacy with the Empire is the main focus and she is counting on Eleanor. Eleanor confidently accepts the challenge, ready to compete in willpower. They arrive at the luxurious guest quarters prepared for them. A staff member welcomes them after their long journey and invites them to relax. The princess shrewdly notices peepholes and hidden spaces behind a portrait, remarking on the excessive caution. Theodore reports that permission for a garden walk has been granted, so the princess decides to rest in the shade. They sit under a parasol in the garden to converse. Leaves flutter in the wind around the peaceful garden setting. The bunny-eared girl asks if Eleanor is being welcomed as well, and the princess confirms it. She deduces that their current location is likely being monitored just like the room. The girl thanks her, explaining she is now a civil official apprentice of Stullens since she cannot wear Mimosa's robes. The princess compliments her, saying the new uniform suits her well. The girl admits Marquis Barchmead is strict, but she finds the experience educational. The princess calls out to Theodore, who immediately responds to her summons. She casts a silence magic so they can have a private conversation without being overheard. The princess praises the girl for already achieving results as a young diplomat. She explains that the invitation is for the second prince's engagement to Christine, a marquis's daughter. The princess identifies the marquis's daughter as the talent she wishes to recruit. The girl questions if poaching a prince's fiancé is even possible, and the princess admits it would normally be impossible. She reveals that the first and second princes are currently in conflict. The cause of their feud is a baron's daughter, who suddenly appeared. The princess predicts Christine's engagement will likely be annulled, creating an opening for them. The girl is shocked that two princes are fighting over a single baron's daughter. The princess notes it is impossible given the status difference, but hints the girl should know why. She alludes to a specific kind of existence, prompting a realization from the girl. The girl realizes the baron's daughter is from another world, just like the Mimosa Shrine Maiden. The princess confirms the girl was adopted by a baron after being found with no relatives. The girl immediately recognizes the situation as troublesome. She deduces the baron's daughter possesses the power of charm to ensnare hearts. The princess warns they cannot approach carelessly since the specific conditions of the power are unknown. She notes that anti-magic items could work, provided the power is actually magic. She reasons that since the princes surely have magic defense, yet were charmed enough to start a faction war, standard defense failed. She concludes it is likely an unblockable cheat authority from another world. However, she notes that the power seems to only affect the opposite sex so far. She decides Theodore should keep his distance, leaving her and Eleanor to handle the night party. The girl imagines Theodore will hate being separated, but the princess knows he will understand. Theodore interrupts to report an invitation to a tea party has arrived from the imperial family. The princess wants to decline to avoid being dragged into the faction war. Theodore reveals the invitation comes directly from Emperor Lupinus himself. The news leaves the Emperor's direct involvement as a shocking development. The scene shifts to the interior of a grand hall lit by a chandelier. The princess and her group enter the room for the meeting. A voice tells them to be at ease since this is a private, secret meeting. The princess bows politely, thanking her host for the invitation. Emperor Lupinus sits before them, welcoming them personally. He expresses his honor in hosting the crown princess of Stulance. He adds that he is glad to see Eleanor is also doing well. The princess thanks him for the winter-produced gifts he sent previously. The emperor asks if the arrangements made by the border count were satisfactory. She confirms there were no issues, realizing the winter incident was not under the emperor's direction. The air grows tense as the two leaders lock eyes. The emperor decides to cut to the chase and states his request. He declares that if the crown princess grants his wish, he will take drastic action. He vows to abdicate and surrender the Lupinus Empire to Stulance. The princess and her companion are stunned by the magnitude of his offer. In exchange, he asks only for the lives of his two sons to be spared. The princess asks why he is making such a sudden and extreme decision. The emperor explains he originally intended to follow the proper steps for an alliance. However, the faction war between the princes has brought the country to the brink of division. The emperor curses the current situation, blaming it entirely on the charm ability of a detestable woman. Eleanor compliments the wise emperor for correctly deducing that the crisis is caused by a cheat-like authority. The emperor explains that although the charm only affects the opposite sex, the fact that the prince is ensnared makes the situation critical. He admits with frustration that the woman's influence within the castle has already grown to surpass his own. Slumping in his throne, the emperor laments that he has almost no usable pawns left to counter her. The bunny-eared attendant questions why they specifically were chosen for this task. The emperor replies that he heard about their handling of the Alyssum and Mimosa cases and sent for them since he cannot act himself. Eleanor asks if he is prepared to pay the price, even if that price ends up being the country itself. The emperor defines a nation as a place where people live, noting they will accept a change in leadership if their daily lives remain satisfactory. However, he declares with a fierce expression that anyone who maliciously toys with the country must be eliminated at all costs. Eleanor and her companion nod in silent agreement with the emperor's resolve. Eleanor notes that His Majesty appears unaffected by the charm and deduces that he must have a countermeasure. The emperor reveals his main protection is likely the charm he holds, though feigning illness to keep his distance also helped. He explains that the item is a talisman called an omamori, passed down in Lupinus since the founding of the nation. Eleanor stares at the talisman in surprise, recognizing the item immediately. The emperor adds that the founding emperor was apparently an otherworlder who held the job title of Kanushi. Eleanor suggests that with this knowledge, they might be able to break the charm on his son. The group continues their strategic discussion in the privacy of the emperor's chambers. The emperor laughs, realizing that an otherworld item is the key to countering an otherworld power. He states that once the charm is neutralized, the only remaining task is to dispose of that woman. Eleanor proposes a specific plan to ensure the woman cannot escape, which involves a bit of a performance. The emperor approves the plan, noting that it also provides a just cause for their actions. He tells them to make a flashy scene while he handles the preparations. Eleanor snaps her fan open, signaling the beginning of their operation. She declares with a smile that they will put on a grand performance to harvest the fool acting like a vixen. Narrating a romance novel plot, she describes a reincarnated heroine who captures the hearts of princes at an academy. The twist reveals the heroine used charm magic, but after the hero struggles, it eventually turns into true love. Meanwhile, the villainous Christine is condemned for bullying, imprisoned in a monastery, and ends her life there. Eleanor scoffs at the idea of a romance that relies entirely on charm without any personal effort. She dismisses such a hollow love story as completely uninteresting. Her companion compliments Eleanor, calling her dress lovely as they prepare to enter the venue. The scene shifts to the grand ballroom where the confrontation is set to take place. The companion notes that the color red is going to look very striking on Eleanor. Eleanor winks confidently, confirming that all the preparations are perfect. The emperor sits solemnly on his throne, watching the events unfold from a distance. Nobles whisper about the emperor's health and the serious faction war caused by the prince, which is affecting trade. Eleanor observes the gathered crowd, noting that the stage is set and they only need to wait for the lead actor. The doors fly open as Prince August makes his grand entrance. The The crowd buzzes with confusion, realizing his partner is the rumored Baron's daughter instead of his fiancée, Lady Engelbrecht. August steps forward and loudly declares that he has an announcement for all the gathered nobles. He annuls his engagement with Lady Engelbrecht and declares he will marry Leona, claiming to have found his destined love. The nobles gasp in shock while Christine stands silently amidst the murmurs. Leona smugly tells Christine to apologize for her bullying, assuring her that August will forgive her if she does. Christine remains stoic and silent in the face of the accusation. Eleanor intervenes, stating that it wasn't bullying but a proper separation due to the vast difference in status between a marquis and a baron. Christine glances toward the emperor's throne, awaiting his judgment. Christine bows, stating she will obey if this is indeed the emperor's command. Eleanor praises the response as perfect, affirming that the emperor holds the final decision on royal marriages. Leona snaps at Eleanor, shouting that she is interrupting Prince August while he is speaking. Leona glares at Eleanor with intense hostility. Enraged, Leona screams that she is being mocked. In a sudden motion, a glass of red wine is splashed through the air. Eleanor lets out a dramatic cry as the wine hits her. A voice shouts in horror at the atrocious act committed against the guest. The guards reveal that the victim is the crown princess of Strunz and warn that this act could destroy the country. Eleanor smirks to herself, thinking that the timing of the incident was absolutely perfect. The emperor clutches his chest, groaning in pain as the chaos unfolds. He apologizes profusely to the crown princess and immediately orders fresh clothes to be prepared for her. Eleanor calls for a doctor and notes that her dramatic acting successfully prevented her from having to quell the room herself. Prince August, realizing the gravity of the situation, stammers an apology to Crown Princess Eleanor. Leona interrupts, demanding to know why August is apologizing and claiming Eleanor interfered on her own. Eleanor coldly rebukes Leona for interjecting in a conversation between royals without knowing her place. Leona arrogantly counters that as the future empress, she outranks a mere royal from another country. Eleanor asks if she intends to bring ruin upon the Lupinus Empire with that attitude. She reveals that Strunz is a superpower 5 times larger than Lupinus and demands Leona withdraw her foolish claim. Eleanor turns to Christine and thanks the Marquis's daughter for her cooperation. With a confident smile, Eleanor declares that she will now break the magic spell for them. Walking away, she remarks that Lupinus seems to have been thoroughly deceived by a foolish witch.